Hello and welcome. This is Excel World Cup Bootcamp Day 9. And this was supposed to be lookup week all week, and Giles is doing a bunch of lookup stuff. But I realized that between all the foundation that he's laid and the few sort of tips and tricks that I've already shared, I don't have a ton of other stuff to share with you on lookups without getting kind of quite obscure. So I thought it would be more helpful to do another case walkthrough to try to kind of reinforce some of what we've covered already in text week and in lookup week. So I've already done Bear Island. I didn't want to do laundry time because we spent a bunch of time talking about that as an example in text week. So we've got three other cases of the ones that are currently free at the moment. I decided I'm just going to roll the dice, proverbially, to see which one of these I'm going to do, so that I wasn't overly prepared. Obviously, I've seen all of these before, so it's not that I'm going to be seeing it for the first time. But yeah, just going to roll the dice and see what happens. So we're doing what's my flight number. I should say I have video walkthroughs of all three of these, but they were all videos that were leaning heavily toward, how to do them with big hairy lambdas and crazy formulas. And what I'm aiming for today is kind of the opposite of that, which is let's just try and use techniques that we've covered in the last couple of weeks, and B, let's talk a lot about thought process, about techniques and ordering and applications and that kind of thing. So, having said that, the first thing to mention um, is that all these cases tend to come with a video, and you can access those videos on the store here. Um, so in a round, you typically, this was the way last year, I assume it will be again this year, you typically get access to the case 15 minutes before um, 15 minutes before you have to start the round. So there's like a 45-minute window in which you can do the case in any 30 minutes, and you get access to just the video before you download the case and start your time. So the first tip here, just a purely tactical thing, is they're usually like a minute long with 20 seconds of intro. Take a minute to watch the video and it will help you get in the headspace. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to skip, there's usually a bit of about the FMWC stuff. Also, they talk very slow, and I am fast twitch, so I'm going to just crank up the speed a little bit. Uh, Now, there is a sort of purely tactical thing here, which is in some of the videos, when they first started doing these, they would scroll through quite a few of the questions. So you could actually not just get a sense of where the case was going generally, but actually read the individual questions. They've started being a little more circumspect about that after they realized that people were figuring out so much. But the main thing is sometimes you get to see the instructions. So if you want to kind of squint and try and read those, you can, but that tends to be a lot of what has been said. But also, what you often get a view of is this is what the data is going to look like. And that gives you a chance to start thinking about, okay, like I look at this and I immediately think I'm going to either want to turn this into a table for ease of reference later on, or I'm going to want to give it three, because it's just three columns, I'm going to want to give it three named ranges. So like name this city, name this IATA, name this ICAO, or something like that. But that's the kind of thing to take this time to start thinking about. You might also, I mean, you already saw it in the scrolling bit before, but it'll give you a sense of this is what some of the inputs are going to look like. You've got lists of routes separated by semicolons and that kind of thing. Anyway, that's the video. Don't want to labor that point too much. But so now let me just go grab. Oops, that's not the right folder. This folder. Where is it? Here. What is my flight number? And let's pull it up. And so now that I've got it, I'm going to start my timer just so I can kind of keep an eye. The biggest thing restricting me here is not going to be the timer. It's going to be the fact that this video is due to be posted online in 44 minutes. So I'm going to have to hurry. But let's take a minute to read the instructions. So this is kind of what it already talked about. You're an employee for an airline, yada, yada, yada. You've been provided with a set of possible flight routes that the airline has shortlisted on the flight routes tab. So let's go take a look at that first. So we've got an origin city, a destination city, we've got a distance, and we've got a departure time. And one thing to notice right away is that this distance has km in it. In other words, this is a text string. It is not a number. So you can, and you'll see this sometimes. We're not going to talk in detail about it now, but you can do something like this to make a number have km at the end of it, but that's not what's going on here. So that's something we're going to have to clean up. And actually, now is as good a time to do that as any. My preferred approach here would just be to find and replace km with blank. And that's, for some reason, turn them all into dollars, but we can change it to number format and clean up. And if you look at the departure times, you'll see those are all actually times. Okay, so that's the first thing. And that's, yeah, there's not a lot of information on them. There's just distance and departure time for each pair. So levels 1 to 2, you ask basic questions about reading and retrieving the data. So, what's the departure city here? How many kilometers are flown for this 10 flight schedule, that kind of thing. So one thing is we're definitely going to want to be able to connect. We're going to want to be able to connect the two data sets. So we would like to have a flight route in this code format over here. So let's see if we can add that now. So actually, sorry, let me start by just first thing I said I was going to do and then promptly forgot to do. I'm going to name this city. I'm going to name this. I'm not going to call it IATA because then I'll get confused. I'll call it code. Slight hesitation there because code is also the name of a function, but it's not a function I think we'll be using here, and I'll call this ICAO. So the first thing is we can do a lookup, and remember that lookup can work with a whole array. So we can give this whole two-dimensional array into the lookup and say look that up in city, returning from code, and that gives us that. And then we can have root code. So we just need to put these two together. And you can do that with just regular concatenation. Yeah, I was going to say you could do it with an array, but actually you can't because it's a 2D array, not two separate column arrays, but that's fine. So we copy that down, and then let's go ahead and give some names here as well. I'm going to call this dist for distance. I'm going to call this dep time, departure time, and I'm going to call this code, I don't know, yeah, RTCD, fine. Anything you'll remember is a perfectly fine name. Okay, so let's get started. And we can look at the details for the later levels later on. So what is the departure city for each of the following flights? Now, I think it does kind of spell it out here if you're not as frequent a flyer as I am. Somewhere? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just assumed you know that. Anyway, I think it says it somewhere, but in any case, an airline flight is just, this is the origin, this is the destination. So we can use text before on this with a dash to extract all the origins, or we can use text split. Giles talked in one of his videos about this, about how text split, if you apply it to an array, doesn't actually give you the full spill, it just gives you the first piece. But if you just want the first piece, then text split works fine. Or we can use left of this comma 3 because they're always 3 characters long, but beware because later on there's a mix of 3 and 4 character codes. So one of these is a little bit more dynamic, but this works absolutely fine here. And then once we have that, any of those ways, we just need to look that up. So we can just look up the whole array in city, returning from, in code, returning from city. And that check that. Sorry, again, just in terms of tactics, in the live kind of competition, you don't see this column and you don't see your score. So what you do see is, one, you get to see this example. So you should definitely, let's just have this point to, oops, I'll have to copy that other formula up as well. So I've done everything on arrays, so it doesn't actually copy nicely up to the example, but that's fine. We can just clean it up a little. Huh? Oh, sorry. So first thing you want to do is just check that your logic is matching this. Then when it comes to actually putting in answers, you'll select the first three answers from multiple choices. So you should be able to get a kind of good degree of confidence that it's working correctly there. Um, and then you'll need to copy this level code and put that in as your last piece. Now, this is this is how they ran it for most of last year, which is there was a sort of checksum. And so you'd get scored on the first three, and then you'd get all the rest of the points for that level if everything was right. The way they did it for the last few rounds, and I think the way they're going to continue to do it, is that instead of a checksum here, this will just be a concatenation of all your answers here. And so basically the idea is, if you get 9 out of 10 of these right, in the old format, your checksum would be wrong and you'd only get the points for the first three, but in the new format, you would get 9 out of the 10 marks. So that's a good thing. Yeah, so that's just a couple of ways to do sense checks. First make sure you match the example, then make sure these are among the answer choices. For a simple case like this, you can also just kind of look at it manually, like, okay, BOG, is that indeed Bogota as you might expect it to be? It is. Okay, carry on. Anyway, enough chit chat on that. Let's talk about level 2. So here the airline adopts a 10-flight schedule. How many kilometers are flown in total? And this is where adding the route code over here is going to save you a lot of time. The way I originally did this, I actually did it the other way around. I split this up on the day. So I split it into a list of city pairs, and then I did a sum ifs where the first city was this and the second city was this to get the distance. But that's a lot less efficient. So what we can do instead is text split of this by a semicolon, and that will spill out into the 10 different routes, and then we can just XLOOKUP these 10 routes in RTCD for route code, returning from, what the heck did I call it? Returning from distance, not disk, dist. And that gives you all of those, and then you can sum all of those, and you get 85328. Check that matches the answer, and it does. That's great. Now, depending on your preferences, you can kind of gather all this up into one formula pretty easily. So we can take this, put it into here, and then wrap it all in a sum. And then that'll give you the whole answer to the level in one cell. But you don't have to do that. If you feel more comfortable spreading it out, that's absolutely fine. There will be a sort of natural tension as you get into more complicated things. Like here, we've got, okay, if you do it in one cell, then you can sort of see everything, but there's no audit trail. If you do it across 10 cells, then you've got this, and it's starting to spread out, but it's 20 columns, it's nothing crazy. And you can sort of see everything. But anyway, whatever way you decide to do it, just take that, copy it down, and hopefully we'll get those answers right. Let's see. Yes, okay. So now, before I even look at level 3 here, I want to remind myself that up here there were specific level 3, level 4, and level 5 instructions. So there's usually a sort of general introduction to how the level is going to work up here, and then some kind of more nitty-gritty instructions down here. It might just be repeated, but it's worth making sure you read both. So level 3, now you start assigning flight numbers. You decide to assign the numbers in the order the schedule is listed, but to make it more interesting, every flight arriving or departing from Canada, Montreal or Toronto, must have a 7 in it. An example is given in level 3. So here's our two Canadian airports, Toronto and Montreal. We talked about the funky wildcard trick that you could use here if you're very clever about it, to say if the third last letter is Y, then that means it's Canadian, but I'm going to use a more kind of straightforward but also more reproducible method here. So now you start assigning flight numbers. You decide to assign the numbers in the order the schedule is listed, but to make it more interesting, okay, so that's kind of a repeat. For example, if the schedule of flights starts as, wait for a second, as all of this, then Sydney to Bogota will be flight number 1, London to Lisbon will be flight number 2, and I don't remember which YUL, Montreal or Toronto, will be flight number 7. Oh, well, there it is, since it departs from Montreal. So in other words, it would just be kind of 3, but now it's jumping up to 7. The next flight in the schedule will be assigned 8, unless it also arrives or departs from Canada, in which case it jumps to 17. And so you just want to figure out what is the last flight number assigned to this whole schedule. Now, here's where I talked about, it's going to start to get big if you have, 10 columns of this and 10 columns of that. And here we've got schedules of 40 flights, so it's going to start to get much bigger. At this point, I would prefer to build a separate model and then kind of use that to answer the questions. I'll show you how you can scale it in a minute, but for now, we're just going to solve one question. So we're going to XLOOKUP that in this column. Remember, there are always merged cells here, so that immediately selects B out to AZ. I'm going to bring it back to just B, and returning from, you can move this out of the way if it's getting in the way of reading letters. And here we just want returning from column G. So that's the full flight schedule. So here I'm going to say text split of that. I'm going to skip the column delimiter and put a row delimiter so I can lay it out down the rows. So this is my root code. And then what do I want to do here? Oh yeah, I want to know about whether it's Canadian or not. So I'm also going to split it a second way into departure and arrival. So if we add a row column delimiter of the dash, that'll split it out this way. So then I want to check, is it Canadian? And now, lots of different ways you could do this, but one simple way is just to add a Canadian flag here. So it's just going to be 1 for Toronto, 1 for Montreal, and 0 for everything else. And I'm just going to name it Canada. So then I can, I guess, Canada departure, Canada arrival. I can, again, look up that whole array, no problem with that, in code returning from Canada. And that will give me this. Now, the one thing you have to be a little bit careful of, which I think was a mistake I made on the day, is that a flight can go from and to Canada. And that is, I think at some point I added these two together, and then my check was if that's equal to 1, as is this Canada. But it could be 2, and that would just be an arrival and a departure in Canada. So just going to say Canada, and we're going to say max of those is equal to 1. Or you could say sum of those is greater than 0, or say whatever you want. It'll give you the same result. Or better yet, what you might want to do is if sum of these is greater than 0, then 1, otherwise 0. And why would you want to do that? Because if you do a little number formatting trick, it'll make it a lot easier to visually inspect these. So what you can do is go to a custom number format. And this is the one that I typically use. So this is, if you don't know custom number formats, that's a longer conversation, but basically you have a string separated by semicolons, and each one, first this tells it how do you want to format positive numbers, this tells it how do you want to format negative numbers, and this tells it how do you want to format zeros. So this is just saying, just show whole numbers, no decimal places, show a minus in front of it for negative numbers, and just show a dash for 0. The dash for 0 is the important part, because now you can quickly see, okay, here we go. We've got a good Canada flag. Now the next thing to think about is how are we going to handle this requirement to have a 7? And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a little more space here, and I'm going to say number. So I'm just going to start with 0, and then I'm going to say if this equals 1, then X, because I haven't worked that out yet, otherwise the previous flight number plus 1. And that's going to throw an error because X doesn't work, but that's fine. So let's just look at one that does not immediately start with Canada and just see if we're, yeah. So here we're giving number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the first 5 flights. Then we need to work out what to do with the Canadian flight. Okay, so now what do we do with the Canadian flight? Well, there's a few different ways you could do this. I think the easiest one is just to kind of generate a large sequence and figure out which parts of it have 7s. So how does that work? Well, you just say, let's say sequence of 1,000. We're talking about 40 flights, so I don't think we're ever going to have to go above that. So I'm just going to say number. I'm going to say has 7. And for that, we can say search 7 in this, and you can see it errors out if there is no 7, and it returns a number if there is, so we can just wrap that in is number. So then, again, different ways you could do this. I'm going to do it by filtering that list. So now these are all the numbers with 7s in them. And now what you can do is you can think about it as, if the previous number is x, then I'm starting from x plus 1, and I need to move up to the next 7 if it's Canadian. And so this, or move up until you hit something, is exactly one of the match modes for X lookup. So say I have 43, then I can X lookup 43 in this list here, returning from this list here. So in other words, the lookup and the return array are the same, and the match mode is exact match or next larger item, number 1. And that gives me a 47. So that's the next number with a 7 in it. So I'm just going to name this range. I'll call it 7s, very imaginative. And then we'll come over and we'll apply that logic here. So we'll say if it's 1, then we're going to X lookup the previous number, I5 plus 1, in 7s, returning from 7s, exact match or next larger item. So that jumps us straight to a 7, then 8, then 9, and so on down. And we see at the end we get to 107, and that is the answer here. So now the challenge is we want to kind of work out 20 answers from that. So you could obviously just dutifully go here, come and get this, paste it in here, and at least just for the purposes of comparing your first few answers versus the multiple choice, that's not a crazy thing to do, but it's not a super efficient way to spend your time. So let's talk about something we can do that will work better, and that something is called a data table. And it's very much a sort of necessary thing to go hand in hand with, if you're going to do your workings like this, where you spread one example out to a whole tab, then you can't make 20 copies of that tab. So data tables are basically a way to ask Excel, what would this value be if I change this value to a bunch of other things? And what is that bunch of other things? It's just going to be these numbers here. So you go Alt-DT, or you go data, I think. Yes, what if analysis, data table. And you want the column input cell. This gets confusing, but the column input cell is the thing that varies down the column, not across the columns. I think you can make that intuitive either way around, which is confusing, but that's the way it goes. So the input cell is the cell that's going to change. So I'm going to take each of these values down the column, put it into the input cell, and see what the output turns into. So we're going to hit OK. That calculates, and then we can link those in, and we're all good. So again, I'm trying to kind of keep this authentic to both taking the time to think about it, to only using the tools that we've sort of set you up with so far, but also to keeping within the half hour. So I suspect we will not get to the end, but don't worry about that. So at this point, I would probably think to myself, okay, got like 12 minutes left. That's probably enough time to do level 4, although level 4 is a little intimidating. So maybe we go and take a quick look at the bonuses. Out of all the possible flights between 2 of the 12 listed cities, how many are not in the airline's flight routes? This is a nice simple one with just some basic math. I filled this answer in immediately in the competition and got it wrong because I was on the live stream for this one, so we got to read the case for a little bit beforehand. So I looked at this, I immediately thought, okay, flights between 12 cities and 12 cities, there's 12 times 12 possibilities, 144, and then just subtract off the number of flights in the database, which is 103. So it would look at something like this. If you wanted to be proper about it, make it a formula, but that's totally wrong. And I didn't work out until much later on, after other people had taken the bonuses and the points were gone, that of course there aren't 144 flights, because from each origin there are only 12 destinations, because you don't fly from Montreal to Montreal. So it should actually just be 12 times 11, or 132, minus the number of flights. So simple math, but I tripped up on that anyway. So throughout levels 1 to 4, which city is the most common destination? So now this is a very typical kind of question. I'm going to show you something for how to approach it. So I'm just going to apply a filter here, and I'm going to filter out everything that is not a number. And that should give me, you can quickly scroll down and check that it does. Yes, that gives me the full list. So then from there, I'm going to, whoops, lots of merged cells. Ugh, hate those merged cells. All right, so I'm just going to copy each of these to a separate tab. So I'm just going to make a new tab. I'm going to call it bonus 2. Might have been better off to unmerge cells before I did this, but in any case, you can still sort of do this. Still do this in blocks. So here's all of level 2 down as far as here. Then here's level 3 down as far as here. And level 4 shifts over a little, so we got to take it from there. Okay, so we're interested in the list of destination airports from here. So these are mostly semicolon delimited lists. So we're going to say first text split of this by semicolon. That'll split it out to a row. And then we want to take the text after of that by dash. And that gives us the list of all the destinations, and that formula should work for every level. There's just one in level 1, and there's different numbers in every level, but that's not a problem. So then, then we just need to take our list of all the airports, or all the airport codes, I should say, which actually I don't even need to come back here to get. I can just say equals code, but let me just quickly check. So the furthest out anything goes is column BS, so I'll just do it up here. I'll say code, and then we're going to count ifs. I think Giles covered this one in a video this week. So we're going to count ifs that is that. Sorry, get out from behind the timer. And then the question was, I think, which one is the most? Yeah, most common destination. So you could just kind of either eyeball this or sort it or something. You can look down here and say, okay, the max is 245, and scan down. There it is at CPT. Or a little lookup trick, since it is still lookup week. You want to get the most common destination. So if you look up some number that's much bigger than any of these, let's say 1,000, in this list of numbers, returning from this list, and say exact match or next smaller item, that will match on the largest one, which is the 245, and return the corresponding thing here. And you used to have it sorted to be able to do that kind of thing, but you don't have to do that anymore. Oh, except that I'm wrong. Enter the city name, not the airport code. Whoops. Okay, so we'll wrap that in a second lookup. Or actually, no, we can, well, there's lots of different ways you can handle this, but let's just add the city here, and then we'll just say return from that, which is column BW, instead of returning from BU. So that's another good reminder that you got to read the question. But anyway, okay. So let's see if we can get level 4 in the time we have left. I wouldn't bet on it, but let's try. Okay, so now you have to, and by the way, this is a good example of the tactics at work, right? Like, it might actually have been a better strategy for me to go and do this level. I probably had time to do it with 12 minutes. I might not have time to do it with 6 minutes. So I went away up here and I got some points, although I might have got them wrong. I might have put the 144 here and got that wrong, and I might have put CPT instead of Cape Town here and got that wrong. With the bonuses, you don't have the calibration like you have with the example, like you have with the multiple choice. For these three, these are all just free text in the online platform. You just type them in. So there's a risk element, and there's also, I was only playing for 130 points there because bonus 3 requires you to have worked out level 5. So probably that was not a good tactical choice. But anyway, I digress. So now we have to abide by NAA rules and assign flight numbers according to these rules. Flight numbers must be assigned in order starting from the earliest departure of the day based on the departure time. Okay. Then if the airline operates a return flight for a given trip, the number of the return flight must be exactly one more than the original flight. For example, if the company operates a flight from London to Las Vegas, and this flight is assigned number 9, and later in the day they fly Vegas to London, that has to be assigned number 10, no matter what time it departs. Okay. So fine. I think that makes sense. So I'm just, I'm going to rename this to L3 and just have a separate thing for level 4. Okay, so we'll go with example 4, and now this, I'm going to put this back next to the case. I don't want this pulling from column G anymore, I want it pulling from column I. And we'll also have to get that number that's in column G in a minute, but probably copied the formula before I did that, but never mind. So we want the number from column G as well. So what is the flight assigned the number in column G? Gotcha. Okay, so first thing we want to do is get the departure time and then try and sort them in order. So we don't need anything about Canada. We don't need any of, well, we will need the data table. So let's keep that there, and we don't need this stuff about the sevens. Okay. And actually, I don't think we need the separate departure or arrival either. So departure time is going to be XLOOKUP. These in, what did I call it? Root code, RTCD, returning from depth time. And we'll just come in here and format that as time, just to make it a little easier to read. Time without minutes, without seconds, sorry. Okay. So I think the easiest way to think about this is to get, I'm going to add the reverse route, then I'm going to add the reverse route time. And then basically what I can do is I can sort it in order first by the smaller of the times, as in the minimum of the departure time and the return time, and then by the departure time. So what that will mean is if there's a return flight of this route, Riga to Easy is, I can't remember where Easy is. Anyway, if there's a return flight on this route, then that will get sorted up with this, and then we can just number them directly. So first let's create the reverse route. So that's just going to be right of this 3 will give me the arrival one here, which will be the new departure one, and a dash, and left of this 3. Another way you could do this would be, well, actually, yeah, I mean, so you could do this with text before and text after and other things, but anyway, same basic idea. So then we want to figure out, is this part of the schedule? Now, an important subtlety here is you don't want to look these up in the table of all the flight routes, because these are all the 100 and some odd routes that you might theoretically operate, but these 70 are the only routes that you are actually operating. So you want to look it up here. So we're going to XLOOKUP this in this list of codes going in the other direction, returning from the departure time, and not all of these will match because not all flights will have a return flight. So we'll say if not found, then NA. I'll copy this format over here again. So now I want a column for the earlier time, and that's just going to be the min of those. I can include the text because min will ignore text, so that's fine. And then I just want to sort these. So how are we going to do that? Sorry, I said I was only going to use tools that we had used, and we have not used sort by. So sorry, I slightly lied there. But sort by is great. I'll tell you more about it soon, but you should love it. So we're going to sort the route codes first by the earlier of the 2 times in ascending order, and then by the departure time in ascending order. And actually, just to make it easier to see what's happening, let's sort the whole thing that way and copy this format. And obviously, as you can see, I'm going to run out of time because I'm trying to do some more exposition here, but that's fine. Let's not worry about that. So what we get is YUL to MAD leaves at 10 past midnight. Madrid to Montreal, I think, leaves at 12:30 noon. But they both get sorted by the earlier time. So this is the departure time for this one. This is the departure time for the return leg. So that pulls both of them together. But then because we're doing a second sort on this, the one that's actually earlier comes first. And then you just basically carry on down that way. So I'm at the 30-minute mark. I didn't make it, but Let's just pretend that I spent 10 less seconds chit-chatting, and we'll go index on this by this number. And that's the answer that we need to give, I think. And let's put it in and see. So it does match CPT to YYZ, does match the example. And we'll drop that in. So bit of a cheat, but it sort of almost kind of made it to 770 points in the 30 minutes. But even without that, like if you can get 3 levels and 2 bonuses out in half an hour and get 550 points, that's a really nice start. There's always room to build and get more ambitious and so on, but that's for the purposes of what we're trying to get you to with bootcamp, if you can do 3 levels and 2 bonuses, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I'll also just set expectations. If you haven't done a lot of these before, that might be too ambitious a target to start with, because obviously I've seen this case before. I've seen a million cases like it before. I can do this stuff, faster than you are likely to be able to do it quickly. And that's fine, because you will speed up as time goes on. Anyway, that's what I got for today. Thanks for watching, and we're going to have a few more. So we've done this sort of text block. We're most of the way through the lookup block. We are going to have a few other kind of miscellaneous other tools, things like sort by, some of the array manipulation stuff, and we're also just going to have a little bit more about the practicalities of what happens on the day, and some kind of tactics and exam technique and that kind of stuff in the last few days before a week from today, which is the battle day, the first esports battle of the year. And I hope that many of you will give that a try. So that's what I got for today. Thanks for watching. See you next time.